Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark. Hello and welcome to my channel. Vice Rhino here. Today, I'm digging into the archives of the World Video Bible School because I kinda miss Kyle Butt. Anyway, it's been a while since he's been a regular host of their stuff, so I had to go all the way back to an upload from 2016 to grab the first of their videos in their Out of Doubt series, which I might cover in its entirety if there's enough interest from you guys. So yeah, comment down below if you want me to continue this as a series, but realistically, it'll be the raw view count that is the deciding factor. So if you really want it, share this video and keep it playing on a loop in the background of a tab somewhere. God, I hate engagement baiting. If this video gets to 50,000 likes, I'll do something that I present as being a major annoyance, but is actually fine. Subscribe, share this video with everyone who doesn't know me in real life, because holy shit, my dad watches some of these sometimes, and man, that's embarrassing. God damn it, Piper, roll the intro already! Hey, hi, it's me. Yeah, normally the video I'm responding to goes here, but I'm back to tell you about Surfshark VPN. Surfshark VPN is a virtual private network which allows you to appear to be connected to the internet from any location where Surfshark has a server. By connecting through Surfshark, you can access streaming services from different geographic locations. This means you may have access to additional libraries of movies and TV shows not available in your home area. Also, there's more states on the no spicy content list now, and Valentine's Day is right around the corner, so do with that information what you will. But the VPN is not all they do. With their Clean Web 2.0 features, you can automatically block ads, reject unwanted cookies without fumbling through the pop-up first, get alerts when a website was the target of a data breach, and block malware. Seriously, if the Clean Web 2.0 feature were the only product that they offered, that alone would be more than worth the price just for getting rid of the cookies pop-up. But of course, you also get the VPN, and Surfshark VPN adds an extra layer of encryption to your devices, keeping you secure on public networks. I always connect to public networks through Surfshark. Surfshark VPN is easy to use and simple to install. They do not monitor, track, or store your data, and it works on phones, tablets, and laptops with no extra fees. Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it out completely risk-free. My viewers get a special promo where they can get an extra 4 months added to their subscription completely free. So go to surfshark.com/rhino for 4 extra months of Surfshark. Again, that's surfshark.com/RHINO for 4 extra months for free. This is a limited time offer, so sign up today. And remember, by signing up for Surfshark VPN, you're helping to support my channel, so thank you.
Tommy loved Mr. Henson. Mr. Henson was the 6th grade science teacher, and he was the best science teacher that Tommy had ever had. In fact, he was the best teacher Tommy had ever had. That's what Tommy thought.
Okay, I'm going to save you the trouble of actually watching it and summarize this little hypothetical story that he's telling. Teach would occasionally take kids on nature walks and talk about how neat it is that some critters evolved some traits. Then one day in class, he asked if anyone could tell him how the universe began, and one kid gave the answer that is the creationist straw man of the actual answer. Teach said, "Good job, you're 100% correct. Now can anyone tell me how life began?" And one kid gave the answer that is the creationist straw man of the actual answer. Teach said, "Good job, you're 100% correct." And it kept going like that for a while. Funnily enough though, with the origin of life one, he went past the origin of life and continued to describe evolution as it progressed through the various types of animals, culminating in human beings. I'm sorry, Kyle, but a fish evolving into an amphibian is not a part of the origin of life. That is something that happens after life has already been around for a while. And at this point, Tommy, the main character of the story, realizes that this isn't what he was taught at home because he's a creationist. Another kid challenges the teacher on evolution, saying that his dad says the earth was created in 6 days, 6,000 years ago. And then Teach dismisses that idea because it came from the Bible, and the Bible is old. There. I saved you 6 minutes of Kyle's video, and we're not even done with the story yet. We're just jumping in when Kyle says this.
This book, it's fine if you want to read about some history. It's fine if you want to read about morality. But for scientific information, it is absolutely no good for anything. Modern science has disproven this book years ago.
Strong disagree. It is not fine for history or morality. For morality, it approves of slavery. It treats rape as a property crime. It encourages you to give more money than you can afford to give to religious institutions. It has the death penalty for women who are not virgins when they marry. It has God rewarding a guy for taking it upon himself to murder an interracial couple. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And for history, It's more than a bit of a mixed bag. Sure, there are some historical details that are correct in the Bible, but apologists will often treat this as an all or nothing kind of deal. The Bible mentioned Pontius Pilate, and we know from other sources that he really did exist. Ergo, the Bible is entirely historically accurate. There are a number of problems with this presentation. First, the Bible is not a single work of literature. It is 66 to 81 individual books, depending on what denomination of Christianity we're talking about. And while there are a handful of books that were written by one author, like the authentic letters of Paul and the book of Luke and Acts, most biblical authors were either one-offs, with that author never having written anything else that we know of, like the authors of the other three Gospels, or they were an amalgamation of other literary works that were compiled and edited together, like the Pentateuch. So to say that the Gospels got some geography right and named a few historical figures accurately, therefore Exodus must have been accurately describing the historical event of Hebrews being freed from slavery in Egypt, is just flat out ridiculous. As with any other book from antiquity, each historical claim it makes needs to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And with the various claims in the Bible, we find that sometimes it is accurate, sometimes it isn't, and sometimes it'll get some details right and others wrong.
And with that statement, he put that book back in his drawer, and he left 21 sixth graders wondering if what they had been taught all their lives about the Bible was right.
Good. Even if it was right, it should be able to stand up to scrutiny. So if you feel that the best way to defend it is to refuse to allow it to be criticized in the first place, that shows a lack of confidence on your part that what it says is actually true.
And if God really does exist, is there evidence that would prove that idea?
Well, if he did, there should be, but so far, apologists seem to only be able to come up with fallacious logical argumentation and personal experiences that can't be demonstrated. It's rather weak evidence given that this God is supposed to be all-powerful.
This course of lessons, this Out with Doubt series, is designed to help us understand and prove the fact that God exists, that the Bible is God's Word, and that Jesus Christ is God's Son, and that things like evolution are false, and we can prove that.
Evolution just seems so out of place on that list. Yeah, I get why creationists feel the need to attack it, but just imagine how goofy that would sound with literally any other scientific field. This video series is designed to help us understand and prove the fact that God exists, that the Bible is God's Word, that Jesus Christ is God's Son, and that things like gravity are false, and we can prove that. What is evolution even doing on that list? You can believe that God exists, that the Bible is God's Word, and that Jesus is God's Son without denying evolution. There are many Christians that do just that. Linking those concepts together is unnecessary and is likely to drive people away from Christianity if they ever become curious enough about evolution to find out that it is, in fact, true. That's actually a very common deconversion story. I started looking into evolution and found that the case against it was incredibly weak. And these pastors have been telling me that it's either evolution or creation, and apparently it's evolution.
And we're going to go about that proof by using some scientific laws. And that's what this first lesson is going to be about, the scientific laws proving God's existence.
How much do you want to bet that it's the second law of thermodynamics? It's always the second law of thermodynamics.
You see, a scientific law is not one that legislators could change. It's not one that people could vote on. It's one that is constant, and every time anyone has ever studied it, it always does the same thing.
A bit of an oversimplification, but yeah, basically. Also worth pointing out is the fact that scientific laws are also very specific. So specific, in fact, that they usually don't play out in reality the same way they do in the math equations. Boyle's law, for instance, states that the absolute pressure exerted by a given mass of ideal gas is inversely proportional to the volume it occupies if the temperature and amount of gas remain unchanged within a closed system. That seems all right, but when you think about it for a bit, you realize that it has some issues if you want to see it apply in reality. For starters, what is an ideal gas? Well, it's a theoretical gas composed of randomly moving particles that do not interact with each other. That's just not how gas particles work. But the interactions are insignificant enough that for scenarios where Boyle's law is used, they can be mostly ignored. And many gases behave close enough to an ideal gas that they'll work for the sake of the equation, but they'll add an error margin to the result. And temperature is rarely a perfect constant in reality. The only places I can think of where that might happen are in situations that are set up with a high degree of precision by people, and possibly out in deep space. Notably, deep space is not a closed system, so Boyle's law doesn't apply there, so it looks like the only place it really applies, ignoring the fact that ideal gases don't actually exist, are in situations created by people. And it's a similar story with all the other scientific laws as well. They only apply in very specific scenarios that are often too specific to be found in nature. Kind of ironic if you think about it. The laws of nature don't actually apply perfectly in nature. But that's kind of the point. Scientists have worked out tiny individual notes of how nature works, and nature as a whole is the complete orchestra playing all of the music of the universe together.
For instance, the law of gravity. The law of gravity says that things fall to the center of the Earth at about 9.8 meters per second squared.
Nope. The law of gravity, more properly called Newton's law of universal gravitation, is that every particle attracts every other particle in the universe with a force that is proportional to the product of their masses and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between their centers. When this law is applied, the result is that objects at the surface of the Earth accelerate towards the center at 9.8 meters per second squared. But the Earth also accelerates towards those objects. It's just that the mass of the Earth is just so large compared to anything on its surface that you can effectively ignore its acceleration towards you when you fall. There's also enough stuff on the planet that the chances are pretty good that your effect on the Earth was canceled out by something on the other side of the Earth doing something similar.
Now suppose that we have come into some conflict with one of the scientific laws. We don't necessarily like them, and we wanted to change one of the scientific laws. Well, how would a person go about changing a scientific law?
Well, if I steelman this argument and say that rather than just not liking one of the laws, we find that it isn't as reliable as a law is supposed to be, then we revise it to become a more accurate representation of reality. A great example of this is the aforementioned law of universal gravitation. As Newton formulated it, it worked fine in most cases, but then there were finicky edge cases like the orbit of Mercury that didn't quite seem to fit. So, did we throw out the law and start over? No, we developed the theory of relativity. And when we did that, it revealed that relativity more accurately predicted the orbits of all the planets, not just Mercury, than Newtonian mechanics did. And yet, Newtonian mechanics work well enough in a lot of circumstances, so are still used today. So to answer the question of what we do when we find a law of science that doesn't work, we conclude that we made a mistake or overlooked something when developing that law, and go back to the drawing board with whatever new data has us concluding that it is now inaccurate. Now, I'm skipping the last bit of his analogy here. He takes a long time to say that even if all scientists unanimously voted to change the law of gravity, it still hasn't changed. Which, no duh. That's because these laws are descriptive, not prescriptive. They are describing how the universe works. They are not enforcing themselves and making the universe conform to how they think it should work.
Are there some laws in science that would verify or prove God's existence?
Nope. Scientific laws are just our way of describing how reality works. They have nothing to do with the existence of God, one way or the other.
I think there absolutely are, and we can look at those, the first of which is called the law of cause and effect.
Hey, guess what? That is not a scientific law. For every scientific law that I have ever Googled, the top result is always a thing like the Wikipedia page for that law, followed by educational resources clearly aimed at kids in school, like Khan Academy, giving basic overviews of that law. For the law of cause and effect, however, the search results are overwhelmingly dominated by self-help gurus talking about manifestation. Also, I happen to know from watching other of Kyle's videos that one of his arguments for the existence of God is that if atheism is true, free will cannot exist. Well, fun fact, if the law of cause and effect were a real scientific law, then free will cannot exist. So if you put those two positions together, then it looks like atheism wins and free will is an illusion.
The law of cause and effect is the most fundamental scientific law that is used in every experiment that is ever done.
The principle of causality is a fairly basic part of the scientific method, yes, but as we have learned from studying quantum mechanics, it's not so simple, and at least sometimes the cause can occur after its effect. While this is unintuitive, it's quantum mechanics. Nothing about quantum mechanics is intuitive, but the quantum folks can do things like build working quantum computers, so clearly they're onto something, even if I personally don't get it.
You, although you might not know it, use that law on a regular basis. Here's what that law says. In this material universe, every material effect that you see has a cause that came before it and that was greater than it.
And that is also how you can tell this isn't actually a law in the sense that he wants you to think it is. Notice that when I said what Boyle's law is, I didn't have a bunch of hedging about how it's only applicable to material things in this material universe. Because when doing science, methodological naturalism is what works. That is, working under the assumption that there isn't going to be some supernatural force messing with your results. Even Answers in Genesis likes to pretend that they're working with methodological naturalism when they publish in the Answers Research Journal. So it appears as though creationists are happy to acknowledge that methodological naturalism is the best way to reliably learn about reality, which is weird considering the fact that creationism's whole thing is that naturalism is completely wrong and that there's a supernatural being waiting around ready to use a miracle to break whatever scientific law he wants at any moment. And even in causality as it is understood in science, the cause does not necessarily need to be greater than its effect, depending on what we mean by greater, of course. Lighting a match isn't all that great, but in the right circumstances, it can be the cause of a massive explosion. But in what sense is one greater than the other? Like, from a conservation of energy viewpoint, you could say that the cause and effect are equal. Sure, an explosion might look greater to our intuitions, but the energy for that explosion was there the whole time. The act of lighting the match was simply the catalyst that caused the energy to be released in such a spectacular manner. But because energy cannot be created or destroyed, the cause and effect are energetically balanced, even if the energy stored in something like a natural gas molecule doesn't seem all that impressive to us. From a thermodynamics perspective, I could see where you get the greater than from, as any energy that is used to do work, in a physics sense where work is a force applied along a displacement, will result in some of that energy being lost to entropy. That is, the energy still exists, but it's in a state where it is no longer capable of being used to do work. So, in that sense, I could see an argument being made that the cause is greater than the effect, but if that's the case, then say that. Greater is a word that is subject to interpretation. Causes an increase in entropy is not. Now, I'm skipping most of his thought experiment at this point because he's doing that thing again where he takes a lot longer than necessary to set it up. So when we come back in, he's talking about seeing a book fly off of someone's desk, hit a wall, and shatter into tiny pieces, with the question being asked, what caused that to happen?
So I say, well, I am glad that you asked me that question. Let me explain it to you. As I was standing up here speaking to you, there was in my ear buzzing a huge, monstrous, the biggest one I have ever seen, almost the size of a dime, a big housefly. And that housefly landed on the edge of that songbook and catapulted that songbook 95 miles an hour to the back of the room and shattered it into 1,000 pieces. Do you believe that? Well, it's a cause that came before it, but what's the problem with it? Well, it's not big enough. It's not great enough. It's not bigger than the effect.
Hey guys, do you want to blow Kyle's mind? Let's tell him about ants sometime. Or dung beetles. Those guys can lift over 1,100 times their body weight. That'd be the equivalent of a human lifting in the neighborhood of 180,000 pounds, which is about the weight of 5 fully loaded semi-trucks. My point is, this is Kyle relying on an intuitive sense of what might be meant by a greater cause. Using intuition, a dung beetle lifting whatever it is dung beetles lift, probably little weights on little barbells made out of pebbles and sticks. Can't think of anything else they'd lift. is an effect that is greater than the cause. If we must avoid the thermodynamic phrasing in order to get this idea across with enough specificity, can you at least reword it to be something like every effect has a sufficient cause? That way we can still have counterintuitive scenarios like our bench-pressing dung beetle, but we don't have things like the examples that Kyle is describing. The next one is a delivery truck being hit by a mosquito causing it to flip over and crash. He's making the exact same point, so we can just skip it outright, while noting that sufficient cause would once again solve the issue of his vague language.
Now, how does that apply to the existence of God?
It doesn't really. But apologists like to pretend that this is an actual scientific law in order to say the universe is a pretty big effect, so it needs a pretty big cause. So that cause must be God. But in reality, when adding up the total energy of the universe, it appears to be zero. Most of the energy in the universe is tied up in matter. Matter is essentially frozen energy. And remember that nifty little gravitational law we discussed earlier, where gravity is directly related to mass? Well, as it turns out, gravity is a kind of negative energy that balances out the positive energy contained within the mass. Essentially, because you must exert a force, in other words, use energy, to separate two particles, that means that you must be overcoming another force that is trying to bring them together, in this case gravity. Since energy is expended in their separation, gravity must be a form of negative energy. And when you add up all the positive and negative energy in the universe, the total ends up being zero. And you don't need much of a cause to overcome zero. What exactly this cause is still up for debate among cosmologists, but I have yet to see a serious cosmologist propose God as the answer. Also, hey, as long as we're talking about things happening with no cause, pairs of virtual particles and antiparticles are constantly popping in and out of existence, seemingly with no cause, just random quantum fluctuations. This is actually one of the proposed mechanisms that causes black hole evaporation. A particle pair comes into existence on the border of the event horizon of the black hole, one particle escapes and one is sucked in. Each time that happens, the black hole loses a bit of its mass to Hawking radiation, leading it to eventually no longer having enough mass to remain a black hole.
Well, the standard textbook evolutionary definition is this. About 14.8 billion years ago, a tiny ball of matter about the size of a period at the end of a sentence exploded in the Big Bang.
Kyle. That is not evolution. That is cosmology. Evolution is about the diversification of biological organisms. If you're going to try and disprove something major about science, you should at least make sure you understand that thing well enough to not get it confused with a completely different field of science.
Now, we need to analyze that idea from two angles. Number one, where did that tiny ball of matter come from?
Unknown. There are a number of hypotheses, like the Hartle-Hawking no-boundary proposal, that suggests that as you look back toward the Big Bang, time actually gives way to space as you approach the singularity, eventually leaving us at a place where there is space but no time, and never actually reaching the singularity, which is the bane of a lot of other models. So in this sense, that little dense dot was always there since the beginning of time, and to ask what happened before the beginning of time is nonsensical, as there cannot be a before the beginning of time, because the concept of before requires time. And that is but one of many models. Hell, it's not even a singular model itself. It is a category of models. There is no shortage of cosmological models dealing with the origin of the universe, many of which don't even have the universe beginning in the sense that most apologists mean when they talk about the origin of the universe. I'm not going to get into them here, but I'll leave a link to a video where I did at least touch on a few more of them.
Do you know when you ask the evolutionist, they will stutter and stammer, and some of them will suggest, well, we don't know, that's really not our thing to discuss, we just need to talk about once it got here. And the other ones will say, well, it came from nothing.
Bit of a false dichotomy there, don't you think? It also sounds like you're talking about asking lay people rather than experts, because, yeah, most people don't have the slightest idea how the universe began beyond what they hear in the theme song for the Big Bang Theory.
Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state.
And do you know what? That's okay. For the vast majority of people, how the universe began does not impact their lives in any way, shape, or form. So if you were to suddenly show up and ask them to explain it, and ask questions that go beyond the hot, dense state thing, they aren't likely to even be aware of the myriad of cosmological models dealing with that exact question. But Vice Rhino, I hear you say, doesn't the existence of so many models answering the same question mean that we don't actually know the answer? Why, yes indeed, hypothetical creationist in my head, that is true. But finding answers that we do not yet have? It's kind of science's whole shtick, isn't it? There was once a time when we didn't know that dung beetles could bench press so many pebbles, but Hamish McEntomologist came along and measured just how big a pebble the dung beetle could lift, and that was how the science of entomology was founded. I'll bet you didn't know that entomology was named for Hamish McEntomologist, did you? History seems to have forgotten the great Scottish clan of McEntomologist. Poor guys. Anyway, all this to say that not knowing an answer to a question does not automatically make God the answer. That is called an argument from ignorance. Just because you have more confidence when you say God as an answer to that question doesn't mean that you are correct. It is entirely possible to be both confident and wrong.
Oh, okay, it came from nothing. And then when you ask them, well, what do you mean by nothing? They say, oh, well, nothing's actually full of all kinds of energy and all kinds of movement. And in fact, one scientist suggested that nothing weighed 25 pounds.
Okay, I'm not going to spend any time looking into the nothing weighs 25 pounds thing because honestly, who cares? Sometimes there's unintuitive stuff in science. Get over it. The reality of the situation, though, is that nothing has multiple potential definitions, and the one that apologists tend to favor is essentially that from which only God can make something. When a cosmologist talks about nothing, they are typically referring to empty physical space, distinct from the space-time of our universe. The nothing that creationists like to imagine is the complete absence of everything, right down to the very laws of physics that govern reality itself. Now, don't get me wrong, it is possible that the laws of physics are not eternal and did have an origin at some point, but there is no reason to just assume that that is the case.
Folks, you can call nothing something, or you can call something that weighs 25 pounds nothing, but ultimately, if there ever was a time when you had nothing, guess what you would have now? Absolutely nothing.
Well, we don't actually know that for the type of nothing that Kyle is talking about because we've never observed such a nothing to study how it would behave. Hell, since one of the properties of Kyle's nothing is that the laws of physics don't exist, literally anything is on the table. Because the thing is, our intuitions, as unreliable as they can be, are based on our experience with a world in which the laws of physics are operational. So intuitively, yes, if you have nothing, nothing can or will change. But that's because of things like the laws of thermodynamics and the laws of gravitation and so on and so forth. But remove all those laws, and who's to say you can't get something from nothing? There is, in the most literal sense of the word, nothing stopping the laws of physics and empty space for those laws to govern from popping into existence. I feel like the actual philosophical nothing that apologists like to talk about would be more likely to act like the infinite improbability drive from the Hitchhiker's Guide series, rather than the boring void that they imagine that it would be.
But we know we've got something, this universe. Could this universe be explained by a tiny ball of matter exploding in something called the Big Bang?
Yes. That is a separate question from the where did that tiny ball come from question, and it's got a more definitive answer to boot.
Well, I think we're going to look at that and prove that that is not a viable, valid option.
Oh, sure, why not? Go for it. But at that point, you're also going to have to stop pretending that you're working within a framework that includes the laws of physics that you were harping on earlier, as the Big Bang Theory was developed through the process of studying those laws. Now, I'm skipping some more because at this point, he takes the next 4 minutes to just say, the universe is fucking big. Like, really big. Amusingly, he does point out that it would take something going the speed of light about 100,000 years to fully cross the Milky Way galaxy, but he doesn't seem to have made the connection between it taking 100,000 years for light to cross the galaxy And the fact that we can not only see things on the other side of the galaxy, though not as many as we'd like since, we're looking through a whole ass galaxy in order to see them, but also we can see things that are even more distant than that, which means the light from those objects has to have been traveling towards us for at least as long as it is far away in light years. Longer for objects that are farther away thanks to the expansion of space. That makes it work like you're swimming from one boat to another, but both boats are moving away from each other as you go, so it takes longer than if they were both stationary. But yeah, the fact that we can see these stars and galaxies in the first place means that the universe has to be older than 6,000 years.
And what are we told is the cause of all of this huge vastness?
The laws of physics. They govern the Big Bang. They govern how stars form, how space expands, how galaxies form, how planets form, and so on and so forth. And it's worth reiterating that despite my talking about them as though they are governing these things in the same way that human governments enforce laws, the laws of physics are our description of how the universe works. If we find out that one of the laws of physics isn't actually applicable, then that will result in us changing how we describe whatever aspect of reality that law covers.
A tiny ball of matter about the size of a period at the end of a sentence?
Oh, right. He's going for the intuitive understanding of how a cause must be greater than its effect. I kind of got lost in the 4 minutes of, gosh, this place sure is big.
Friends, I do not think that you believe that that's a plausible explanation.
Well, then you think wrong, because I do believe that.
Because it is absolutely not plausible. That is a ridiculous idea. I would just as soon or sooner believe that a mosquito could bring a UPS truck to a screeching halt and doing flips into a ditch than a tiny ball of matter could create a universe that's 20 billion light years across.
Well, that sounds like a you problem. Just because you personally have a hard time wrapping your tiny little brain around it doesn't mean it's not true.
Now, what would the creationist suggest was the cause for the universe?
Oh, God, obviously. And then they'd likely ignore the distant starlight problem, or at best hand-wave it away by appealing to God creating the light from stars in transit for no apparent reason than to trick people into thinking that the universe is older than it is.
Well, of course, the creationists would suggest that God caused the universe.
Yay, I was right. Do I get a prize? Come on, I've given so many gold stars to creationists over the years. I gotta get something for this.
Well, when the creationists suggest that God caused the universe, the skeptic says, well, hold on just a second. If you say that every effect has to have a cause that came before it and that was greater than it, and you've got a God, then that means the law of cause and effect militates against the idea of a God.
That is a really weird way to say what caused God, but yes, if you want to treat that as an inviolable law, then God must have a cause. Naturally, you will now pivot to the only things that begin to exist have a cause thing.
You know, sometimes you can change the entire meaning of a sentence just by adding one word. For instance, you go up to someone and you say, "Friend, I like you." What does that convey? Well, we all understand exactly what that conveys. A message of encouragement, of affection. Now, you go up to that same person, you say, "I like you." Not. Did we just change the entire meaning of that sentence? Oh, we certainly did.
Oh, man, for someone as verbose as I am, I still find myself complaining about Kyle's verbosity. But, I mean, to be fair, I am verbose because I have a lot to say. Kyle appears to be verbose in order to pad his runtime. At this point, I'm pretty sure I've cut out more than half of his video, and aside from just giving brief snippets of context, just so you know we're no longer talking about the things that we were clearly just talking about when we come back, we've lost nothing. I actually considered making y'all sit through the 4 minutes of him talking about just how big the universe is, because at one point he just kept asking how long do you think it would take to get across the galaxy traveling at light speed, and he just kept not answering it, and then asking again, and then giving a hypothetical wrong answer, ramping up towards the real one, but not quite getting there. And I wanted to make you all watch that, simply so that I could cut in at that point and joke about how it'd take less time than it takes Kyle to answer that question. But I'm not enough of a sadist to do that, so I skipped it. You're welcome. I am truly a benevolent Rhino.
Did we say that the law of cause and effect says that for every effect there is a cause that came before it and that was greater than it? Is that what we said? Think hard.
I don't know. I don't actually remember. Maybe I would have the ability to remember if you weren't filling my brain up with all these thought experiments about mosquitoes causing UPS trucks to do flips on the highway or something. Anyway, let's just rewind and check the tape, shall we?
Here's what that law says. In this material universe, every material effect that you see has a cause that came before it and that was greater than it.
Ah, I see. Your use of the word material was your way of weaseling out of this law applying to God. Well, given that this isn't actually a law in the way that Kyle needs it to be for this argument, it doesn't actually matter, but even if it were, I doubt that the scientific formulation of that law would include the word material. Laws describe how reality works. If reality actually worked the way Kyle is describing it, then it would have a much more precise formulation that wouldn't need to use special pleading specifically to allow for God's existence.
That's not what we said. We said that for every material effect in this material universe, there's a cause that came before it and that was greater than it. Why do we have to have the word material?
Because without it, you can't win the word games that you're playing. You didn't add the word material because there was some observation or calculation that determined it wouldn't apply to immaterial things. You added it specifically so that you could special plead your way out of God needing a cause. Admittedly, it does do a better job than what I thought Kyle was going to say earlier regarding things beginning to exist, because the counter to that one is the immediately obvious question of, well, what if the universe is just the thing that didn't begin to exist, as a plethora of cosmological models conclude? But it remains special pleading nonetheless. I wonder if he actually tries to justify its inclusion for anything other than winning at word games. So far, this is actually the most honest I've ever seen an apologist be about the cosmological argument. He has essentially just explicitly stated that the only reason to add the word material to what he calls the law of cause and effect is so that it won't apply to God. There is no justification for it outside of that. But let's see if he tries to pivot.
Because we're dealing with a scientific law, and science can only deal with the things that we can touch, see, taste, hear, or smell. Science can only study material things.
Oh, okay, so it's even worse than that. It's not that material is needed so that it won't apply to God. It's that material is needed because we don't know if it'll apply to God. Because science can't study God. In other words, what caused God might still be a valid question with this explanation.
The God of the Bible has never been accused of being material.
God is immaterial, straight from the mouth of the butt. Yes, that is technically an equivocation, but we're like 3 or 4 fallacies deep in Kyle's reasoning at this point, so I feel like one fallacy for the sake of a butt joke is acceptable for me, right?
In fact, over in John chapter 4, verse 24, the Bible says God is a spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and in truth.
Okay, that whole God is immaterial thing, I guess I should address that for real. Okay. Here we go. Genesis 2, 7-9 has God physically planting a garden and sculpting not only humans but all the plants and animals out of dirt. Genesis 3:8 has Adam and Eve hearing the sound of God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Weird for a non-physical immaterial being to make noise while walking in a garden enjoying a cool breeze. Genesis 32, 22-32 tells the story of Jacob wrestling with God and actually overpowering him, but God is a sore loser, so he cheats to win by punching Jacob in the dick. Exodus 33, 18-34 has God mooning Moses because looking at his face would be too much. In Genesis 18, God appears with 2 other men in physical form to Abraham, who washes their feet and feeds them a meal before having a conversation about how many righteous people would be enough to have God not commit genocide on the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And of course, this is not even touching on the fucking Gospels, which talk about the time when God was, to quote the Bible, made flesh and dwelt among us. So to say that the God of the Bible has never been accused of being material is to ignore the contents of the Bible. Sure, it also says that he is a spirit, but according to Christians, humans are both spirit and flesh, and the law of cause and effect is supposed to apply to us, isn't it? So I see no reason why it should not also apply to God.
If you wanted to say, how big is God's arm? How tall is God? What is the circumference of God's head? Is there a scientific experiment that you could do to get that type of information? Absolutely not.
Maybe not that information, but you could ask Moses how much junk God has in the trunk.
Because God is not material. Does God meet the criteria for a cause that would legitimately explain the material effect of the universe?
The way you've explained things here? No. You just ignore the Bible verses that portray God as a material being so that you can then turn around and say yes.
Absolutely. He came before the universe. The Bible describes God in the Psalms as a God that was from everlasting to everlasting. He has always been, will always be, the God who is, who was, and who will be.
Okay, you can assert that all you want, but just because the Bible said it doesn't actually mean it's true. You got a lot of ground to cover between everything has to have a sufficient cause and that cause must be a god. Then there's even more ground between that and the God that caused it must specifically be the God depicted in the Bible. You can't just say the universe needs a cause, we don't know what it is, therefore out of the millions of gods that have been created by humans over the years, the one God that I happen to believe in is the real one that must be the cause. I mean, you can say that, but you shouldn't. It's bad reasoning.
He was before the universe. Is he a big enough cause? Well, in Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 and following, when God describes himself to Abraham, he describes himself as the Almighty God. Job, the patriarch, said that nothing that God wants to do can be restrained from his hand.
And Judges 1:19 says, "And the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron." And Mark 6:5, when Jesus went back to Nazareth to do miracles there, says, "And he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid hands on a few sick people and healed them." Weird for a God who is all-powerful to not be able to drive out an army because it has superior technology, or to not be able to perform mighty works at home. Maybe this whole Bible thing isn't quite as perfect as Kyle wants you to believe.
Now, there is another thing that we need to discuss, and that is the idea of morality.
Oh, damn. I really thought in the last 4 minutes he would prove my earlier prediction about the second law of thermodynamics right. I guess I lost that bet. As penance, I've uploaded a second picture to my WikiFeet page. Yes, that's right. One of you finally got around to creating that. So I found a picture from a few years ago when one of my kids painted my toenails rainbow colors and added that to the page for your enjoyment? I mean, sure, if that's your thing, go for it. I'll leave the link in the description if you really want to, but damn, my feet are gross. Now, fun fact about my life. I just learned that I have an IMDb page with 1 credit for having co-hosted the Sunday show one time. And I learned about this because my WikiFeet page has the link to my IMDb page at the top. And I clicked on it while thinking, surely this is just going to be a dead link. There is no way I'm on IMDb. So yeah, I learned about my IMDb profile through my WikiFeet page. The life of a content creator sure is interesting. Maybe I should find out how to get my YouTube videos listed on IMDb so I can get enough non-union credits to apply for a SAG card, so I can finally become the next Marvel superhero. Just gotta make sure they get a stunt double for me to do all the hard things like bending over and running. Tough stunt work like that just destroys fragile bodies like mine.
We have studied multiplied cultures. And in every culture that we have ever studied, we have seen those cultures understand a difference between right and wrong.
A lot of them disagree about what is considered right and what is considered wrong, but yes, pretty much every culture has some distinction between right and wrong.
Now, they haven't always agreed on what is right and what is wrong, but they have all agreed that some things are right and some things are very wrong.
Yeah. And if there were an all-powerful, all-knowing creator who wanted us to follow his very specific rules about what he considers right and wrong, you'd think he could communicate that to us accurately enough to avoid there being a difference of opinion between cultures. This makes it look like, rather than being an inherent characteristic, morality is learned through cultural exposure.
Morality, we call it. That idea in humans that when they violate their conscience, they feel guilt. Where would guilt or morality originate if humans evolved over multiplied millions of years from a primordial, non-living slime? Where would they get the idea or the capacity to feel something is right or something is wrong?
Simple. Some species evolved to be social, and in social species, behaviors that we see as moral had a survival advantage, so natural selection worked to favor those behaviors. Of course, as with all things in evolution, there is variation. Natural selection can't work without variation after all, and so we end up with different cultures that have slightly different moral opinions, and people within those cultures who disagree with their overall culture as a whole. But there is a general agreement on a couple of big ticket items across most cultures, and a more narrow agreement about smaller things that vary depending on what culture you're looking at.
Well, I would suggest to you that there is no way that that type of morality could evolve.
Well, then you would be wrong.
When you look at the animals, they don't have that type of morality.
Yes, they do. Morality among animals is very well documented. Parsing out what they are feeling while exhibiting moral behavior can be difficult, as we do tend to anthropomorphize, but moral behavior, particularly in mammals, is the rule, not the exception.
Monkeys never sat around and said, today I think we're going to take a vote on what our community thinks is right and what our community thinks is wrong. A lion never felt guilt when it killed a gazelle and drug it back to the pride to eat. Animals don't feel that. Dirt and rocks don't feel that. Where would you get the idea that some things are right and that some things are wrong? Well, there's really only one place. If a moral, non-material God created humans, you would expect that God to put into humans the ability to understand the difference between rightness and wrongness.
Yep. And as mentioned earlier, the variation in morality between cultures and individuals, which Kyle has acknowledged, demonstrates that this is not what happened. Okay, I'm just going to end it here. He spends the rest of his time talking about the Nuremberg trials and claims that our ability to prosecute the Nazi leaders and find them guilty, despite there not having been an existing legal code to which they were subject to at the time, proves that the legal code that was being applied was the one laid out by the Christian God. All I've seen in this whole video is just him not understanding the scientific side of things and making baseless assertions about the creationist side of things. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Gems for You 990, who says, "The rituals are not for God. God needs nothing from us. Rather, the rituals are for us. They remind us of our self-pride, our lack of sensitivity towards others, our lack of humility. They are a reminder to look within before we judge others. To deny the value of religious rituals is an illusion of greatness which we often possess." Just a reminder here that my go-to example of a pointless ritual is the leper cleansing one. That's the one where, after a leper is healed, he is still considered to be unclean. Now, how does he become clean? By going to the priest, who has to kill a bird, then dip a live bird in the dead bird's blood, then sprinkle that blood on the leper and the altar in a very specific way. Then the leper has to sleep outside for a week, shave all his hair off, come back to the priest, who will then kill a lamb, dab some of the lamb's blood on the leper's right ear, right thumb, and big toe of his right foot, and then the priest will pour some oil into his left hand, then dip the fingers of his right hand into that oil, then sprinkle it 7 times, then dab the oil in the same places that he dabbed the blood earlier, and then offer a ewe and some oil as a burnt offering. And this isn't even the whole process. I left out quite a few details. So, my question is, if the rituals are meant to remind us to look within ourselves before judging others, then why is a leper, someone who is undoubtedly one of society's outcasts who isn't in a position to judge anyone, made to go through this whole process before being declared ceremonially clean? He's already been healed before it even starts. This is just what he has to go through in order to be allowed back into the camp with everybody else. But is there some significance to the right ear, right thumb, and big toe of the right foot? Would he not feel enough contrition for his crime of having suffered through a painful disease if the blood and oil were dabbed on his left ear, left thumb, and left big toe? If the priest used his left hand to dab the oil, does that cause the leper to remain prideful and judgmental? The combination of how gruesome the process is, along with how specific it is, takes it out of the realm of just a symbolic thing that makes you go through introspection. It rather looks like God thinks people are icky, and he has weird rules about what they have to do in order to become tolerable to him. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to go to surfshark.com/rhino to get 4 extra months for free. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I live stream with Surfs every Wednesday, 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Tim Robertson for being my Patreon and sponsorship manager, Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the dung beetles bench pressing the seeds that are my channel. If you'd like to be an insect bodybuilder, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com surfshark.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time! Because are you gonna knock my microphone? Okay, bye-bye. Began beyond what you hear in the theme thong. 2319. We have a 2319.